The emergency beacon cut through the silence of the Terran Deep Space Monitoring Station like a knife. Commander Sarah Chen dropped her coffee, the dark liquid splashing across her workstation's holographic displays as the urgent red warnings cascaded down the screens. The signal originated from Kepler 442c, a frozen hellscape on the outer rim of explored space, where the Galactic Council had established a joint research facility. "Ma'am, we're receiving a distress call from Research Station Omega-7, Communications Officer Martinez called out, his voice tight with concern. "Multiple life signs detected, but the station's primary systems are failing." Sarah's mind raced through the protocols. Kepler 442c was a death world by any reasonable standard, with surface temperatures that could freeze nitrogen solid and storms that could tear apart reinforced structures. The research station housed scientists from 12 different species, all working together on some classified atmospheric research project. If their heating systems failed, most of the alien researchers would be dead within hours. "Prep the rescue shuttle Phoenix for immediate departure," Sarah ordered, already moving toward the hangar bay. "Emergency cold weather gear for a full team. I want life support specialists, engineers, and medical personnel ready to go in 15 minutes. The journey to Kepler 442c took 18 grueling hours at maximum burn. Sarah spent most of that time reviewing the personnel files of the research station. The facility housed 43 beings from various species, delicate crystalline researchers whose silicon-based bodies could shatter in extreme cold, aquatic tide runners who required specialized environmental suits to survive in any atmosphere, proud Vorian warriors whose reptilian physiology made them vulnerable to temperature drops, and several other species whose biological needs were as diverse as their homeworlds. And then there were the humans. Dr. Elena Vasquez, an atmospheric physicist from Earth's Antarctic Research Division. Dr. James Park, a survival specialist and former military engineer. Dr. Maria Santos, a xenobiologist who had spent years studying how different species adapted to extreme environments. The three humans were part of the Terran Scientific Exchange Program, representing humanity's growing presence in galactic research initiatives. As the Phoenix approached the ice world, the scope of the disaster became clear. The research station, normally a gleaming structure of interconnected domes and laboratory modules, was partially buried under a massive avalanche of frozen methane and water ice. Several sections were completely dark, their power systems obviously compromised. The main communications array lay twisted and broken, explaining why they had lost contact after the initial distress signal. "Scanning for life signs," reported Dr. Kim, the mission's chief medical officer. "I'm detecting multiple biological signatures, but they're clustered in what appears to be the central laboratory module. Whatever heat sources they have left, they're all gathered around them." Sarah studied the readings carefully. The outside temperature was minus 230 degrees Celsius, well below the survival threshold for most galactic species. Even with the station's emergency systems, hypothermic death would be setting in for the non-human researchers. Time was running out. The Phoenix set down on a relatively stable ice shelf about 200 meters from the damaged station. The rescue team moved quickly, their breath forming clouds of ice crystals even inside their environmental suits. The airlock to the main station was frozen solid, the metal contracted and seized from the extreme cold. "Plasma cutters," Sarah ordered. "Cut us a way in, but be careful not to damage any internal systems that might still be working." The cutting process took precious minutes, each one potentially costing lives inside the station. When they finally breached the outer hull, a wave of frigid air rushed out, carrying with it the sound of voices, some speaking in standard galactic, others in the clicking, whistling, and harmonic languages of various alien species. The rescue team moved through darkened corridors, lit only by emergency lighting strips that flickered weakly in the cold. Ice covered every surface, and their footsteps echoed with hollow, crystalline sounds. As they approached the central laboratory, the voices became clearer, and Sarah began to make out what was happening. "The human females demand we participate in their strange thermal conservation ritual," came the translated voice of a Vorian researcher, the universal translator crackling with static from the cold. "They insist we must conserve heat together and speak of something called one bag," repeatedly. "We do not understand this human concept," replied another voice, this one belonging to a crystalline being. "Our thermal readings indicate we are approaching critical shutdown temperatures. Perhaps their ritual has scientific merit?" Sarah exchanged glances with her team as they approached the laboratory entrance. Through the reinforced window, they could see an incredible sight. The laboratory had been completely reorganized. What had once been a sterile research environment filled with delicate instruments and computer terminals had been transformed into what could only be described as a survival shelter. Dr. Elena Vasquez, her dark hair tied back and her face flushed from exertion, was directing a group of alien researchers in the construction of what appeared to be a large, tent-like structure made from laboratory emergency blankets, thermal sheeting, and insulation materials stripped from non-essential equipment. Her movements were quick and efficient, displaying the kind of competence that came from extensive cold-weather survival training. Dr. James Park was working on what looked like a makeshift heater, constructed from laboratory power cells, heating elements salvaged from equipment, and carefully arranged to provide maximum thermal output without creating dangerous hotspots. His engineering background was evident in the precise way he calculated power consumption and heat distribution. Dr. Maria Santos was moving among the various alien researchers, checking their vital signs and monitoring their physical condition with a portable medical scanner. She was speaking softly to each one, explaining something in their native languages, the universal translator allowing her to communicate the basics of human cold weather survival techniques. "The human protocols appear to have merit," one of the Tide Runner researchers was saying, its aquatic physiology making it particularly vulnerable to the cold. "Their body heat generation is remarkably efficient, and their survival strategies show sophisticated understanding of thermal dynamics." Dr. Vasquez looked up as she noticed the rescue team approaching the laboratory door. Relief flooded her features, but she didn't stop working. "Thank God you're here," she called out as Sarah's team entered the laboratory. "We've got 36 non-human researchers in various stages of hypothermia. The primary heating system failed 6 hours ago, and the backup systems are running on emergency power that won't last much longer." Sarah looked around the transformed laboratory with growing admiration. The humans had essentially created a large-scale version of a survival shelter using principles that any experienced cold-weather researcher would recognize. The one bag that the alien researchers had been referring to was clearly a reference to the emergency sleeping systems that the humans had improvised. Large, shared thermal environments where multiple beings could benefit from collective body heat and shared warming resources. "Status report," Sarah requested, her medical training kicking in as she began assessing the condition of the alien researchers. "We've managed to keep everyone's core temperature above critical levels," Dr. Park reported, not looking up from his jury-rigged heating system. "The crystalline researchers are the most vulnerable. Their silicon-based physiology makes them extremely susceptible to thermal shock. The Vorians are doing better, but their metabolic rate drops significantly in cold conditions. The Tide Runners are struggling because their cooling systems are designed for aquatic environments." Dr. Santos approached with her medical scanner. "I've been monitoring everyone's vital signs and administering what support I can with our emergency medical supplies. The key has been explaining to everyone that human survival techniques aren't mystical. They're based on solid thermodynamic principles that work regardless of species physiology." Sarah nodded, impressed by the comprehensive approach the human team had taken. "What's this about conserving heat together and one bag?" Dr. Vasquez smiled tiredly. "Basic survival technique. When you're dealing with life-threatening cold, you pool resources and share thermal mass. The one bag refers to the way we've essentially created a single, large survival shelter instead of trying to heat the entire laboratory. Everyone stays together, shares body heat, and we focus our limited warming resources in one concentrated area. The alien researchers were initially reluctant, Dr. Park added. Most galactic species have very individualistic approaches to survival. The concept of intimate physical proximity for survival purposes is foreign to many of them, but when we explained the science behind it, they began to understand. Sarah looked around at the alien researchers, many of whom were now working together to improve the improvised shelter. A proud Vorian warrior was carefully adjusting thermal blankets around a group of smaller researchers. Crystalline beings were using their natural geometric precision to optimize the shelter's structure for maximum heat retention. Tide runners were contributing their understanding of fluid dynamics to improve air circulation within the enclosed space. "It's remarkable," one of the crystalline researchers commented, its translated voice filled with something that might have been admiration. Human survival techniques prioritize group cooperation and resource sharing. Most of our species would have attempted individual survival strategies, which would have resulted in significant casualties. Dr. Santos nodded. That's one of the key differences in human survival philosophy. We evolved as social creatures who survived by working together during harsh conditions. Our techniques assume that group survival is more important than individual comfort. The rescue operation proceeded smoothly from there. Sarah's team worked with the human researchers to safely evacuate the most vulnerable alien beings first, while simultaneously working to restore partial power to the station's heating systems. The improvised shelter had bought them precious time, keeping everyone alive long enough for help to arrive. As they worked, Sarah found herself listening to the conversations between the human researchers and their alien colleagues. What had started as an emergency survival situation had become an impromptu cultural and scientific exchange. The alien researchers were fascinated by human cold-weather survival techniques, while the humans were learning about how different physiologies responded to extreme environmental stress. Your species' approach to survival challenges many of our assumptions about efficiency and resource allocation, observed a Vorian researcher as Dr. Park helped secure its environmental suit for transport. We had not considered that collaborative thermal conservation could be more effective than individual heating systems. It's not just about the heat, Dr. Vasquez explained as she helped pack up their improvised equipment. When you're in a survival situation, morale and psychological support are just as important as physical resources, knowing that others are working to keep you alive, and that you're contributing to keeping them alive helps fight off panic and despair. The evacuation took several hours, with multiple trips by the rescue shuttle to transport all the researchers safely back to the Phoenix. Throughout the process, the alien researchers continued to ask questions about human survival techniques, clearly impressed by what they had experienced. As the last group prepared for transport, Sarah noticed something remarkable. The alien researchers were no longer referring to human survival methods as strange rituals or incomprehensible behavior. Instead, they were discussing thermal conservation principles, collaborative resource management, and group survival psychology with the kind of respect typically reserved for advanced scientific theories. We will need to include human survival methodologies in our emergency protocols, stated the senior crystalline researcher. Your species has demonstrated survival capabilities that exceed our previous calculations. Dr. Santos smiled as she secured the last of their medical equipment. Survival isn't just about technology or individual strength. It's about adaptability, cooperation, and the willingness to share resources when times get tough. Those are principles that work regardless of what species you are. As the Phoenix pulled away from the ice world, Sarah reflected on what she had witnessed. The human researchers hadn't just survived an impossible situation, They had turned it into an opportunity to demonstrate the effectiveness of human survival philosophy to a group of alien scientists who would carry that knowledge back to their home worlds. The distress call had brought them to rescue a research station. Instead, they had ended up demonstrating something far more significant about humanity's place in the galactic community. 3 months after the Kepler 442c incident, Commander Sarah Chen found herself standing in the Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council headquarters on Nexus Prime. The circular chamber, designed to accommodate representatives from hundreds of different species, buzzed with activity as delegates took their seats in environmental pods suited to their respective physiological needs. Sarah had been summoned to provide testimony about the rescue operation, but as she reviewed her notes, she sensed this was about more than just a routine incident report. The rescue of Research Station Omega-7 had sent ripples throughout the galactic scientific community, and those ripples were apparently still spreading. "The session will now come to order," announced Counselor Zeth Prime, the crystalline being who served as the current rotating chairperson. Its geometric form caught and refracted the chamber's lighting as it spoke. "We are here to review the incident report from Kepler 442c, and to discuss its broader implications for galactic emergency protocols." Sarah stepped forward to the testimony platform, a circular disc that rose from the chamber floor and was surrounded by translation and recording equipment. Around her, hundreds of alien faces, or what passed for faces among the various species, turned in her direction. "Commander Chen," Counselor Zeth Prime continued, "please provide your account of the rescue operation." Sarah activated her holo-display and began her presentation. Images from the rescue operation filled the air around her: the damaged research station, the improvised survival shelter, the alien researchers working together under human guidance. But as she spoke, she noticed something unexpected in the audience's reaction. Instead of the polite but detached attention she had expected, the delegates were leaning forward in their environmental pods, engaging with her presentation with obvious interest. When she described the human survival techniques, several species began animated discussions among themselves. The universal translators created a low hum of overlapping conversations. The human researchers implemented what they called thermal conservation protocols, Sarah explained, highlighting the improvised shelter in her display. These techniques prioritized group survival over individual comfort, pooling resources and body heat to maintain life support for all personnel. "Commander Chen," interrupted Delegate Vorthak, an imposing Vorian whose scales gleamed under the chamber lights. "You described these as standard human survival protocols. Is this accurate? These techniques are commonly known among your species?" Sarah nodded. "Basic cold weather survival training is provided to all personnel assigned to extreme environment postings. The principles Dr. Vasquez, Dr. Park, and Dr. Santos employed are taught in our military academies, research institutions, and civilian emergency preparedness programs." A wave of what could only be described as amazement rippled through the assembly. Species that had never shown much interest in human capabilities were now examining the technical readouts with obvious fascination. "Remarkable," commented Delegate Syl Varon, a tide runner whose aquatic nature required her to speak through a specialized, fluid-filled communication device. "Our own emergency protocols assume individual survival pods and isolated life support systems. The concept of deliberately increasing proximity during crisis situations contradicts our basic safety assumptions." Dr. Ketten Moore, an elderly ethereal whose gaseous form swirled in its containment field, projected its translated thoughts. "We have reviewed the thermal efficiency calculations. The human approach achieved a 47% increase in survival duration compared to our standard protocols. This is not marginal improvement. This represents a fundamental advancement in emergency survival methodology." Sarah found herself in the unexpected position of defending techniques she had always considered basic common sense. Respectfully, counselors, these aren't advanced methodologies. Human children learn these principles in basic education. When resources are scarce and conditions are dangerous, you share what you have and work together. The alternative is that everyone dies separately. But this contradicts optimal resource allocation theory, objected Delegate Nix Kalar, a mathematical-minded geometric whose crystalline structure pulsed with calculated light patterns. Individual survival pods maximize efficiency by eliminating redundant resource consumption. Your approach appears mathematically suboptimal. Dr. Maria Santos, who had been invited to provide technical testimony, stepped forward. May I respond to that, Commander? Sarah nodded, and Dr. Santos activated her own display. Delegate Nix Kalar raises an important point about mathematical optimization, Dr. Santos began. However, there's a critical factor missing from the equations: psychological resilience and cooperative efficiency multipliers. Her display showed comparative survival curves, with probability calculations that made several of the more mathematically inclined species sit up and take notice. When beings work together in survival situations, several factors improve overall survival probability. First, shared body heat creates thermal efficiency that exceeds the sum of individual thermal outputs. Second, collaborative problem-solving leads to better solutions than isolated thinking. Third, group morale provides psychological resilience that prevents panic-induced mistakes. But most importantly, Dr. Santos continued, cooperation creates redundancy in critical thinking. If one individual becomes incapacitated by hypothermia, cold shock, or panic, others can continue maintaining survival protocols. Individual survival approaches have single points of failure. The mathematical displays that accompanied her explanation sent excited murmurs through the assembly. Several species began rapid calculations, their various forms of mathematical processing visible in light patterns, sound frequencies, and neural field fluctuations. Delegate Vorthak spoke again, his translated voice carrying undertones of what might have been respect. Dr. Santos, are you stating that human survival protocols assume individual incapacitation as a probable event? Not assume. Plan for, Dr. Santos replied. Human emergency protocols are designed around the assumption that at least some individuals will become unable to care for themselves. We plan for partial team incapacitation from the beginning. This is... Delegate Silvarin paused, her fluid-filled chamber bubbling as she processed the concept. This is fundamentally different from our approach. We calculate optimal individual performance and multiply by the number of survivors. You calculate suboptimal individual performance but include cooperative multipliers and failure redundancy. Dr. James Park, who had also been called to testify, stepped forward with his own presentation. It goes beyond just survival calculations, respected delegates. Human emergency engineering follows similar principles. His display showed the improvised heating system he had constructed at the research station. Rather than trying to repair the primary heating system quickly, I built a completely new system using available resources. The design prioritized reliability over efficiency, redundancy over optimization. The power output was only 60% of theoretical maximum, Dr. Park explained, but the system could continue operating even if multiple components failed. I designed it assuming that some parts would break, some connections would fail, and some power cells would lose capacity. Counselor Zeth Prime's geometric form shifted into what Sarah had learned was the crystalline equivalent of leaning forward with interest. Dr. Park, this approach contradicts established engineering principles. Optimal system design maximizes efficiency and minimizes resource consumption. For normal conditions, yes, Dr. Park agreed. But emergency engineering operates under different assumptions. When you can't predict what will fail or when, you design systems that can continue functioning even when parts of them stop working. The engineering specialists among the various species began intensive discussions. Sarah watched as mathematical models appeared in the air around different delegations, each species working through the implications of redundant design philosophy. This explains much about human technological development, observed Dr. Kess-Min, an analytical whose insectoid form was perfectly suited for rapid data processing. Your species' engineering systems often appear inefficient compared to optimal designs, but they demonstrate remarkable resilience under stress conditions. We've been studying human starship designs for decades, added Chief Engineer Veltar, a biomechanical whose cybernetic implants interfaced directly with computational systems. Human vessels consistently outperform calculated specifications during emergency situations. We attributed this to design flaws that accidentally created beneficial redundancies. Dr. Park smiled. Not accidental, Chief Engineer. Human engineering philosophy assumes that complex systems will fail in unpredictable ways. We design for graceful degradation rather than optimal performance. The session continued for hours, with delegates from various species asking increasingly detailed questions about human survival and emergency protocols. What had started as a routine incident review was becoming something much larger, a comprehensive examination of human approaches to crisis management. Commander Chen, Counselor Zeth Prime finally said, the human delegation submitted a proposal along with your incident report. Would you please present this proposal to the Assembly? Sarah activated a new section of her display, showing a comprehensive document that had been prepared by the Terran Scientific Exchange Program. The Human Federation proposes the establishment of joint survival training programs for all galactic research installations. These would include cross-species emergency protocols that incorporate collaborative survival techniques. Additionally, Sarah continued, we propose the development of hybrid emergency systems that combine the efficiency of galactic standard technology with the redundancy principles of human emergency engineering. The chamber erupted in discussion. Species that rarely agreed on anything were suddenly engaged in intensive debates about resource allocation, survival probability calculations, and emergency protocol optimization. The implications are significant, observed Delegate Mortellin, a strategic whose role involved long-term planning for the Galactic Council. If human survival protocols demonstrate superior performance under crisis conditions, our current emergency standards may be fundamentally inadequate. There are broader considerations, added Delegate Yith Saren, a cultural whose species specialized in interspecies relationship management. Human emergency protocols require high levels of cooperation and trust between different individuals. Many of our species have cultural barriers to the physical proximity and resource sharing these techniques require. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the atmospheric physicist who had coordinated the survival efforts at the research station, stepped forward for the first time. Respected delegates, may I address the cultural considerations? Please proceed, Dr. Vasquez, Counselor Zeth Prime replied. The alien researchers at Station Omega-7 initially had exactly those cultural barriers, Dr. Vasquez explained. Vorian personal space requirements, crystalline contact sensitivity, Tide Runner environmental needs. All of these seemed incompatible with collaborative survival techniques. Her display showed recordings from the research station, including conversations between the human and alien researchers during the emergency. But when we explained the science behind the techniques, and when the alternative was death, those cultural barriers became secondary to survival needs. More importantly, Dr. Vasquez continued, the experience changed how those researchers think about cooperation. Several have since contacted us requesting additional training in human emergency protocols. Are you suggesting that exposure to human survival techniques modifies cultural attitudes toward cooperation? asked Delegate Yith Saren, its translator conveying obvious interest. I'm suggesting that when people, regardless of species, experience the effectiveness of collaborative survival firsthand, they begin to see cooperation differently, Dr. Vasquez replied. Not as a cultural choice, but as a practical necessity for optimal outcomes. The chamber fell into thoughtful silence as the implications of this statement settled over the assembly. Sarah looked around at the hundreds of species represented, each with their own evolutionary history, cultural development, and approach to survival and cooperation. Counselor Zeth Prime, Sarah said, with your permission, I would like to share one additional observation from the rescue operation. Please proceed, Commander. When we evacuated the research station, something remarkable happened. The alien researchers didn't just learn human survival techniques, they began improving them. Crystalline researchers used their geometric precision to optimize shelter construction. Vorian warriors applied their tactical thinking to resource allocation. Tide runners contributed fluid dynamics expertise to improve air circulation. Sarah's display showed the enhanced survival techniques that had emerged from the cross-species collaboration. The result wasn't just human techniques being adopted by other species, it was the development of entirely new approaches that combined the best elements from multiple species' capabilities. If we implement joint survival training programs, Sarah concluded, we won't just be teaching human techniques to other species. We'll be creating opportunities for collaborative innovation that could advance emergency protocols far beyond what any single species could achieve alone. The assembly erupted in excited discussion once again, but this time the tone was different. Instead of debating whether to adopt human techniques, the delegates were discussing how to integrate their own species' capabilities into collaborative survival protocols. 1 year after the Kepler 442c incident, the first Galactic Survival Training Center opened on the neutral world of Haven 7. Commander Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the facility, watching as the strangest class in galactic history prepared for their final examination. Below her, in a massive environmental chamber that could simulate the most extreme conditions found throughout known space, 24 beings from 12 different species were working together to survive a simulated emergency scenario. The chamber was currently configured to replicate the frozen methane storms of an ice giant's moon, with temperatures that would kill most life forms in minutes. But these weren't just any life forms. They were graduates of the Integrated Survival Protocol Training Program, the first cross-species emergency response specialists in galactic history. And they weren't just surviving the deadly conditions, they were thriving in them. Temperature holding steady at -220 Celsius, reported Dr. Maria Santos, who had accepted a position as the training center's chief survival instructor. Wind speed is currently at 160 kilometers per hour, with methane precipitation and near-zero visibility. Sarah watched through the reinforced viewing windows as the diverse team worked with seamless coordination. 3 human specialists, including Dr. Elena Vasquez and Dr. James Park, were leading the construction of a sophisticated survival shelter, but this wasn't the improvised emergency structure they had built at Research Station Omega 7. This was something entirely new. The shelter incorporated crystalline geometric optimization principles that maximized structural integrity while minimizing material usage. Vorian tactical engineering provided strategic resource placement and defensive considerations. Tide Runner fluid dynamics expertise created an advanced air circulation system that regulated both temperature and atmospheric composition for multiple species simultaneously. Fascinating, commented observer Del Narthan, a senior analytical who was documenting the training program for the Galactic Council's review. The cooperative efficiency ratings exceed all projected calculations. Individual species capabilities appear to multiply exponentially when integrated through human collaborative frameworks. Dr. Keaton Moore, the ethereal representative who had been present at the original council session, swirled thoughtfully in its containment field. The training program has achieved something remarkable. It has not replaced individual species' capabilities with human techniques. Instead, it has created synthesis methodologies that enhance all participants' abilities. Sarah nodded, reviewing the data streams from the exercise. The key breakthrough came when we stopped thinking about teaching human survival techniques to other species and started thinking about developing universal survival principles that could be implemented by any physiological configuration. "Show me the thermal efficiency comparisons," requested Tactical Coordinator Vex Jaron, a military specialist whose role involved evaluating the program's potential applications for emergency response operations. Dr. Santos activated a holographic display showing side-by-side efficiency measurements. Standard individual survival pods achieve baseline survival duration for single individuals. Human collaborative techniques extend survival duration by approximately 47%, as we demonstrated during the original incident. However, Dr. Santos continued, the integrated techniques we've developed here extend survival duration by 123% compared to individual pods and 42% compared to pure human techniques. The numbers caused a stir among the observers. Observer Del Narthan's data processing organs worked visibly as it calculated the implications. "You are stating that cross-species collaborative survival techniques demonstrate more than double the efficiency of standard galactic protocols?" "Correct," Dr. Santos confirmed, "but the improvements go beyond just efficiency metrics." The display shifted to show problem-solving speed measurements, resource allocation optimization, and what the researchers had termed crisis adaptation velocity, how quickly the team could modify their approach when conditions changed unexpectedly. The integrated teams solve emergency problems an average of 68% faster than individual specialists, Dr. Santos explained. They demonstrate 85% more efficient resource utilization, and they can adapt to changing crisis conditions 3 times faster than teams using single-species protocols. Sarah watched as the training exercise below entered its most challenging phase. The environmental chamber began simulating a secondary crisis. Structural failure of their temporary shelter combined with the failure of primary life support systems. This was the kind of cascade failure that typically resulted in total mission loss. Instead of panic, the cross-species team responded with practiced coordination. The crystalline specialists immediately began calculating new structural configurations, while the human engineers assessed available materials. Vorian tactical experts evaluated threat priorities, while Tide Runner atmospheric specialists worked to maintain breathable air quality in the degraded environment. "Look at the decision-making process," pointed out Dr. Vasquez, who was monitoring the team's performance from the control room. "No single individual is trying to solve the entire problem. Each species is contributing their optimal capabilities to specific aspects of the challenge. The humans are coordinating resource allocation and maintaining team cohesion," observed Dr. Park. "The crystallines are optimizing structural mathematics. The Vorians are managing threat assessment and tactical priorities. The Tide Runners are handling atmospheric and environmental control. But note that leadership is fluid," added Dr. Santos. "When the primary challenge shifted from general survival to structural engineering, coordination automatically transferred to the crystalline specialist with the best mathematical modeling capabilities." Observer Del Narthan's excitement was evident in its rapid data processing patterns. "This represents a fundamental advancement in crisis management theory. Leadership optimization based on situational requirements rather than preset hierarchy protocols." The exercise concluded successfully, with the cross-species team not only surviving the cascade emergency, but actually improving their situation by the end of the simulation. As the environmental chamber returned to normal conditions, The team members began their post-exercise analysis with obvious enthusiasm. "Time for the big question," Sarah announced to the observation group. "Are we ready to recommend full implementation of the Integrated Survival Protocol program across all galactic research installations and emergency response units?" The question had been building toward this moment for months. The success of the training program was undeniable, but implementing it galaxy-wide would require significant changes to established emergency protocols, resource allocation systems, and cultural expectations. "The statistical evidence supports implementation," observer Del Narthan stated. "Performance improvements justify the resource investment required for cross-species training programs." "The tactical applications are significant," agreed Tactical Coordinator Vex Zarin. "Emergency response teams using these protocols would demonstrate superior performance in crisis situations across a wide range of scenarios." Dr. Keaton Moore's ethereal form pulsed with what Sarah had learned was the equivalent of nodding agreement. "The broader implications extend beyond emergency response. These collaborative frameworks could be applied to any situation requiring rapid problem-solving under resource constraints." "There is one consideration that has not been addressed," interrupted a new voice. Council Delegate Moore Yessen, a senior strategic whose species specialized in long-term consequence analysis, entered the observation deck. "The cultural and political implications of widespread adoption." Sarah had been expecting this conversation. "Please elaborate, Delegate." "The Integrated Survival Protocol program requires unprecedented levels of interspecies cooperation and trust," Delegate Moore Yessen explained. "Successful implementation assumes that different species can work together intimately during high-stress situations." "That's correct," Sarah agreed. "And the training program has demonstrated that such cooperation is not only possible but highly effective." "However," the delegate continued, "what happens when this cooperative capability extends beyond emergency situations? When species that have spent centuries maintaining careful diplomatic distance suddenly discover they can work together more effectively than they can work independently?" The observation deck fell silent as the implications became clear. Sarah looked down at the cross-species team, who were now sharing a meal together while discussing improvements to their survival techniques. Humans, crystallines, Vorians, and tide runners sat together as easily as if they had been working together for decades rather than months. "You're suggesting that the survival training program could fundamentally change interspecies relationships throughout the galaxy," Sarah said. "Not could," Delegate Moore Yessen replied. "Will. The question is whether the Galactic Council is prepared for such changes." Dr. Vasquez spoke up from the control room. "Delegate, may I share an observation from the training program?" "Please proceed, Doctor." "Every species that has participated in this program has reported the same thing. Working cooperatively with other species is more rewarding and more effective than they expected, not just in emergency situations, but in general problem-solving and creative work." Dr. Vasquez activated a display showing survey results from program participants. 96% of participants report that they would prefer to work in integrated teams rather than single-species groups for any challenging project. 88% state that they believe their home species would benefit from closer cooperative relationships with other galactic cultures. "The training program hasn't just taught survival techniques," Dr. Park added. "It's demonstrated that the benefits of cooperation extend far beyond emergency situations." "Which brings us back to the fundamental question," Delegate Moore Yessen said. "Is the Galactic Council prepared to deal with the consequences of species that no longer want to maintain traditional diplomatic distances?" Sarah considered the question carefully. The success of the survival training program had implications that extended far beyond emergency response. If species could work together this effectively in crisis situations, why couldn't they work together just as effectively in normal circumstances? "Perhaps," Sarah said slowly, The question isn't whether we're prepared for closer interspecies cooperation. Perhaps the question is whether we can afford not to pursue it. She gestured toward the training team below, who were now collaborating on design improvements for the environmental chamber itself. Look at what they've accomplished in just 1 year of working together. Survival techniques that surpass anything any single species has developed. Problem-solving capabilities that exceed the sum of their individual abilities. If we implement this program galaxy-wide, Sarah continued, we're not just improving emergency response capabilities. We're creating the foundation for a level of interspecies cooperation that could advance galactic civilization in ways we can't even imagine. Observer Del Narthan's data processing patterns accelerated. The economic implications alone are staggering. Integrated research teams, collaborative engineering projects, cross-species innovation initiatives. The scientific advances would be unprecedented, added Dr. Keaton Moore. Problems that have challenged individual species for centuries could be solved by integrated teams in years or decades. Tactical Coordinator Vex Jarin leaned forward with obvious interest. The defensive applications are significant. Crisis response capabilities that could handle threats no single species could manage independently. Delegate Moore Yessen listened to the growing excitement around the observation deck with what might have been amusement. You are all assuming that increased cooperation would produce positive outcomes. But cooperation also means interdependence. Species that become accustomed to working together may become unable to function independently. Is that necessarily a bad thing? Sarah asked. Humans have been interdependent with each other for our entire evolutionary history. We've never functioned as completely independent individuals, and that interdependence has been the foundation of our technological and cultural development. But you are proposing interdependence between species with fundamentally different evolutionary histories, physiological requirements, and cultural values, Delegate Moore Yessen pointed out. Dr. Santos stepped forward. Delegate, that's exactly what we've been testing for the past year. The training program participants come from species with completely incompatible evolutionary backgrounds. Yet they've learned to work together more effectively than any of us thought possible. The key insight, Dr. Vasquez added, is that cooperation doesn't require species to give up their individual characteristics. It requires them to understand how their characteristics can complement other species' characteristics. Sarah made her decision. I'm recommending full implementation of the Integrated Survival Protocol program with one modification. We expand it beyond just survival training. We develop integrated training programs for research, engineering, exploration, and any other field where cross-species cooperation could provide advantages. The goal isn't to create dependency between species, Sarah continued. The goal is to create options. Species that want to work independently can continue to do so. But species that want to explore the possibilities of deeper cooperation will have the frameworks and training to do so effectively. Delegate Moore Yessen considered this for a long moment. A voluntary adoption model. Species can choose their level of participation based on their own cultural preferences and strategic objectives. Exactly, Sarah agreed. We're not mandating cooperation. We're providing the tools and training that make effective cooperation possible for species that choose to pursue it. The observation deck fell quiet as everyone processed the implications of this approach. Below them, the cross-species team had finished their meal and were beginning preparations for their next training exercise. Their easy collaboration and obvious enthusiasm for working together provided a compelling argument for the program's potential. I believe, Observer Del Narthan finally said, that we are witnessing the beginning of a new phase in galactic civilization. The question is not whether this change will happen. The question is how we manage it to ensure positive outcomes. Sarah nodded, watching as the diverse team below prepared to face their next challenge together. Then let's make sure we manage it well. The Integrated Survival Protocol program was approved for galaxy-wide implementation 6 months later. Within 5 years, cross-species cooperative teams were working on everything from deep space exploration to advanced theoretical research. The survival techniques that had emerged from a frozen research station had become the foundation for a new era of interspecies collaboration. And it all started with 3 humans who insisted that when survival was at stake, sharing body heat in one improvised shelter was better than dying separately in individual pods. Sometimes the most profound changes begin with the simplest ideas.